Our guest today was the first woman to be tenured in psychology at Harvard, where is still professor of psychology. The recipient of three Distinguished Scientists Awards, she is the author of 11 other books, including the international bestseller Mindfulness, as well as The Power of Mindful Learning, Counterclockwise, and On Becoming an Artist. Her trailblazing experiments in social psychology have earned her global recognition. She is known worldwide as the mother of mindfulness and the mother of positive psychology. We are honored to have her with us, and our focus is on her latest book, which is a must read: The Mindful Body, Thinking Our Way to Lasting Health. It is a great honor to have her with us. Ellen Langer, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Ellen, from our exchanges, I was struck by your humility, and I'm going to ask you to park that humility for a moment and let our audience know the impact of your work, because we're so familiar with the term mindfulness and we have this kind of mental model of what it means. But this was a word almost unknown when you began your work back in the 70s.
I was in Chicago a while ago, and there's even a restaurant, the Mindful Burger. So the word is certainly out there. And Professor Philip Maiman published a paper that actually showed, I'm going to be immodest as you requested, that as I would publish, the word became that much more common. But people need to understand what I mean by being mindful. Many people think of meditation, and meditation is fine, but it's just not what I'm studying. Meditation is a practice. Mindfulness, as I study it, is not a practice. It's just a way of being once you recognize a few very simple truths, as we'll call. All you need to do is know that you don't know. Now, and being mindless, I think the easiest way to understand that is being frequently in error, but rarely in doubt. So everything you're taught by your parents, by an education, by the news is always put in absolutes. And it turns out that everything is always changing. Everything looks different from different perspectives. So these truths are just not some of the time. Now, if you know that you don't know whether this is going to be a time it's true or not, you sit up and you pay attention. So let me give you an example. If I ask you, Aidan, how much is one plus one?
Two.
Okay. And this is the thing that we think we know best. But it turns out one and one is not always two. If you add one cloud, one plus one is one. If you add 1 wad of chewing gum plus 1 wad of chewing gum. If you add one pile of laundry plus one pile of laundry, one plus one is one. So in the real world, it doesn't equal two as or more often as it does. Now, just imagine after we finish talking, a very low probability event, somebody says to you, "Hey, Aiden, how much is one plus one?" You're no longer going to just mindlessly blurt out two. You're going to pay some attention to the context. And then you're going to answer more mindfully and say, it could be one, or you might say it could be two. Right. So what happens once we recognize that we don't know, we tune in. Now, it's very hard for people to take all the things they know and just assume that they're wrong. Right. And 45 years of research has shown me that mindlessness is the rule, not the exception. Almost all of us are mindless almost all the time. So, how to become more mindful? If you pay attention to the things that you think you know, and just ask yourself to notice three new things about the person you live with, about that water bottle you just drank, about anything, you notice things. And if you notice them, you come to see you didn't know them as well as you thought you did. So your attention naturally goes to them. Or if you're able to just accept the fact that you don't know, then you would also just tune in. Now, what happens when you have the sense of everything is new because everything is changing and you're actively noticing the neurons are firing, and all of this research shows that it's literally and figuratively enlivened. It's the way you feel when you're having the most fun. So you can't be mindless and passionate, mindless or even finding something humorous. So it feels good. And so when I say to people, you should be mindful all the time, some people shudder because they think it's like thinking. And even thinking has gotten a bad rap. Thinking is fun. What's not fun is the mindless worry that we're not going to get the right answer. And you don't have to practice being mindful. You just have to accept that you don't know. So if you came to visit me right now, I'm speaking to you from Mexico. So you've never been to the place that I'm at right now. You wouldn't have to practice anything. You wouldn't have to prepare it anyway. You'd come in and you'd be curious and you'd look at the paintings on the wall and say, "Yeah, I wondered, did she paint that?" And so on. So it's not a practice, it's a way of being.
Years ago, I noticed that I was being mindless in that I was working in a job that I didn't really like. I was on the hamster wheel. I had the fancy car, wore the Armani
Mhm.
suits, all this stuff. And I realized I had children and they were young and I was never mindful, I was never present. And I had this moment of waking up. And I think that is a great start. And you mentioned that there was a couple of things that were moments in your life. And one of those moments was when your mother, may she rest in peace, battled with cancer. And this experience of minding her and observing how she dealt with that battle had a profound impact on your work.
Yeah, I would say that the experience with my mother's breast cancer, is how it started, was the reason for decades of research that I've conducted. So she had breast cancer, it had metastasized to her pancreas. That's the end game. Then all of a sudden it was gone. How could it be gone? The medical world couldn't explain it. And that was going to be a goal for me to see if I could explain it and then share the information so other people could experience that as well. And this is all part of my mind body unity idea, which is a big part, but not the only part of the mindful body. So, you have a mind, you have a body, supposedly. And the question is, how do you get from this fuzzy thing called the mind to the body? And no one can answer that. And I thought about it. I thought, well, this is silly. These are just words. And if we put the mind and body back together, it's one thing. Then wherever we're putting the mind, we're also putting the body. Now, that doesn't mean that there's nothing going on physiologically. It just means it's all happening more or less simultaneously, rather than you have a thought and this kicks this and that kicks and that, and so on. So we've done lots of studies showing that this mind body unity that is very important to help us be healthy, and happy. And so the very first of these was a study done forever ago called the counterclockwise study. Now, Aidan, this is interesting because you asked me to be immodest. This is an important study.
I'm just gonna jump in because I think that study, I'm hoping the movie is made. I saw Awakenings, which was about Oliver Sacks, and I know there's a script written about you, about your work, with Jennifer Aniston as proposed person
Yeah.
to act in that. I hope that movie gets made in the future as well, because this was one of the turning points in this idea of how you think and mind body unity.
Right.
I love this study.
The reason I'm calling it famous is because if you tune into The Simpsons Go to Havana, they discuss the study. So, then you've made it. Anyways, but the idea is very simple. What we did was retrofit a retreat to make it seem as if it was 20 years earlier. And then we had elderly men live there as if they were their younger selves. So they were speaking about past events as if they were just unfolding. And by putting the mind and body back together, which drove the study, now their minds are in an earlier time, and we took measures of their bodies. And what we found in a period of time as short as a week, their vision improved, their hearing improved. Hey, tell me, have you ever heard of an elderly person's hearing or vision improving without medical intervention? So that itself was incredible. Their memory improved, their strength improved, and they looked noticeably younger. Now, truth be told, they didn't look 20 years younger, but still the measures revealed that they looked younger. And so that was the first test of his mind body unity.
You recreated that study as well recently.
Yes, in Italy, and it was also done in the Netherlands and South Korea, and in England. Those were demonstrations, not studies. But so then we did this next study with chambermaids. This is interesting because chambermaids who are exercising all day long don't see themselves as getting any exercise. They think exercise is what you do after work, and after work, they're just too tired. So all we did was change their mindsets. And we taught them that work is exercise. Making a bed is like working at this machine at the gym, dusting the windows, is like this other machine, and so on. So we have two groups, one who doesn't realize their work is exercise, the other that now believes their work is exercise. The groups were not eating differently, consuming more or less. They weren't working any harder. Again, just that change of mindset. And we found the group that now saw their work as exercise lost weight. There was a change in waist to hip ratio, body mass index, and their blood pressure came down. Interesting, right? I'm not going to go through all the studies. I hope people will be interested enough to read the book.
Yeah.
The most recent one is a study on wound healing. So we inflict a wound, not a big wound because we're not sadists, but a little wound. And people are in front of a clock. Unbeknownst to them, the clock is rigged. And for one group, it's going twice as fast as real time. For another group, it's going half as fast as real time. And for the third group, it's real time. And the question is, does clock time, perceived time, have any effect on healing? And the answer is yes. Healing followed perceived time, not real time. And the implications of this, are enormous. But there's lots of other work that I talk about in the book that also speaks to the idea of mind body unity. If you imagine fatigue, most people think the body can only take so much, right? And so first thing I did was I asked my students at Harvard in this health class, how far is it humanly possible to run before you just can't take it? These are smart kids. So they know a marathon is 26 miles. So that's where they start. Then it becomes like an auction. They say 28, 30, 35, then somebody typically yells out 50 and everybody groans. Okay. Then what I do is I turn on a video of the Tarahumara, which are a tribe that live in Copper Canyon, Mexico, and they can run over 200 miles without stopping. And the important thing is to look at the difference between, even if we say 50 and 200 is enormous. And that's the difference between where I believe we are and the minimum of where we can be with respect to every aspect of our health and other aspects of our well being. Now, so I was reminded when I was writing the book about a study I had read that Frank Beach had done, I think it was in the 50s. And he took little boy rat and introduced a little girl rat, and they'd copulate until the little boy rat couldn't take him. He was just so fatigued, right? He needed a timeout. Now, what Frank Beach did was for half of the little boy rats, he would immediately introduce a new little girl rat, and he was ready to go. And the point being, as soon as you change the context, you have renewed energy. And the way to understand this, so imagine you're at work and you're word processing, all day long, and your back hurts and your fingers are hurting. And then at the end of work, to relax, you go home and you play the piano. Same activity, but a different context, and you have renewed energy. So we have lots of things like this that speak to mind body unity, and to say nothing of all of the work on placebos, that you take this pill and it's nothing, right? But you believe it's something. And by taking it, then you heal. Now, what I've been trying to get people to ask themselves that if the pill is nothing, then who's doing the healing? You're doing the healing. We're doing the healing. And my goal is to find a way to allow this to occur more naturally without physicians giving us a make believe pill.
One of the things you said, Ellen, in the book was when you witnessed this with your mother. And I thought this was so powerful to understand this because many of us witness this. A doctor gives you a diagnosis and you don't maybe seek a second opinion. You accept it and you become almost beholden to that diagnosis. But it could
Yeah.
be wrong because you talk about the importance of the borderline effect.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. I don't talk about that enough. And there's so much that I'm excited about in the book, and I can only mention so much. This is fun. Imagine that you and I took an IQ test and you got a 60, you got a 70. which would put you in the normal range, and I got a 69, which would make me cognitively deficient. Now, you don't have to be a statistician to know there's no difference between 69 and 70, right? I could have sneezed, misread it, been a little tired, so many different explanations. But now that I'm put in the category, what we used to call retarded, of cognitively deficient, I don't engage in intellectual activities. The world treats me differently. I see myself differently. And my guess is in a very short time, if you and I took tests again, now there'd be a very big difference between us. Sort of like a donut is going to expire on Tuesday, and it's now Monday at 11:59, and then it's 12 o'clock, then it's 12:01. So at 12 o'clock, the donut is okay to eat, but at 12:01, it's ridiculous.
I keep saying this to my wife. I'm like, going, it's not pre-programmed to self-destruct like Mission Impossible. Like it's 12:01, I'm done.
I think the most important thing for people to understand is that science only gives us probabilities. It only gives us maybes. And the mistake we make is to take those maybes, those diagnoses, prognoses as absolute, which then, as we've just said, makes them self fulfilling prophecies. If you do a study and you get significant results, the assumption is, if it's significant, that if you do it again, you're probably going to get the same findings. And when those are translated into absolutes, we give over our health, our independence to maybes. And I'm not suggesting that medical facts are worthless. I'm suggesting they're not worth nearly as much as people assume. And there's another way of looking at this, which is whatever can be predicted for the group cannot be predicted for the individual. Let me make that a little clearer. You and I go to a Mercedes parking lot, and let's say there are 100 cars. All right. Almost all of those cars are going to start when you turn the key in the ignition. Would you bet your life savings that any particular car chosen at random is going to start? People no, because there are lemons, right? Michael Jordan makes a million baskets, but he misses on occasion, right? And so when the medical world is telling you, which they never should, they can't know things like this, you have 3 months to live, you should absent yourself from those numbers because they can't be sure. And that's very important. It's also this other thing that occurred to me the other day, not entirely relevant, but I'll make it relevant. So when I talk about people being oblivious to what I'm trying to teach, this mind body unity to give us control, right? If it's one thing, then wherever I put my thoughts, I'm putting my body, which makes me very powerful. That I realize people don't even have body unity. So you take a medication for one part of your body, oblivious to the fact that it's affecting your whole body. Now, the point of that I find interesting and important to share is we have many chronic illnesses where people think that they're uncontrollable. And all chronic means is that right now the medical world doesn't have a sufficient cure for them. It doesn't mean that there won't be or isn't at the moment things we can do. And if you realize that your whole body is one thing, then whatever is ailing you, if you can help the other parts of you, you're going to implicitly, explicitly as well here, help all of you. So there are always things we can do. And, and this awareness of people's mistaken beliefs about chronic illnesses led me to a treatment, a psychological treatment for chronic illness. So if you were diagnosed with a chronic illness, most people assume your symptoms are going to stay the same or get worse. Right? Chronic means I'm not getting better. It's only going to go downhill. But nothing only moves in one direction. Sort of like the stock market. If the stock, except on, when was it, 1920, the pandemic, if the stock market is going down, it goes down, then it goes up a tiny bit, then it goes down. Or if it's going, let's be more positive, If it's going up, it doesn't go up in a straight line. So too with any of our symptoms. So what's happening when the symptom for a moment is better? All right. Well, we can't ask ourselves that question if we don't acknowledge that these things happen. So, what we did was very simple. We take people, and we've done this with a host of chronic illnesses. And all we do is call them periodically. How are you now? How is the symptom now? Is it better or worse than the last time we called? And why? Now, that why question is very important because then you begin to search. Yeah, why is my pain less now than it was before? And that search is mindful. And as we've already said, I have 45 years of research showing mindfulness itself is good for your health. And I believe that if you look for a solution, you're more likely to find one than if you presume there is no solution. All right. So we've done this with people who have multiple sclerosis, chronic pain, Parkinson's, arthritis, a host of real things. And in each case, people are able to alleviate their symptoms. Now, and the thing, this was my replacement for placebos because you can't give yourself a placebo because you have to give yourself something that you're making believe it does something. And if you know you're making believe, I don't, although that even could work because there are some people who set their alarm clocks for the wrong time. And but still, they manage often to get to work on time. But be that as it may, this attention to symptom variability can easily be conducted by yourself. You take your smartphone and you set it to ring in an hour. And when it rings in an hour, you ask yourself, well, how is my back pain? Is it better or worse than before? And why? And then you set it for 2 hours and 15 minutes, random times. And you go through this throughout the day, the week. Sometimes it takes longer than that. Now, several things happen when you do this. The first thing, and this is relevant to the research I did when I first became a psychologist, you feel that you have some control over your life. And that feels good. Right. The second is that there are going to be times when you see, gee, it doesn't hurt as much. So, gee, that feels good because I thought I'm always, always whatever. We're never always anything. But, so now you wake up to that. When you're looking for, as I said, the why now, why is it better or worse than before? You're being mindful, the neurons are firing, and that's good for your health. And finally, again, that if you look for a solution, I think you're more likely to find it.
I loved a quote you opened this part about the attention to variability with Tolstoy's quote. You said, "No disease suffered by a live man can be known, for every living person has his own peculiarities and always has his own peculiar, personal, novel, complicated disease unknown to medicine because of that difference of each of us." And you say noticing subtle changes and asking why they have occurred and then testing for this variability and testing your hypothesis can dramatically affect all diseases. I love that because this is the piece about being mindful. And you say, for example, most of us are wired to spot the negatives because we go, oh, yeah, I feels bad,
I
struggling
don't
with.
think we're wired to. I think we're
Okay.
taught.
We're taught to, we're programmed to, or socialized to. But one of the things I wanted to mention is so a lot of people have problems with addiction or believe I drink too much. For example, I'm in Ireland, right? We have a problem with that over here. Many countries do. But you say, for example, not if you are actually mindful and you pay attention to variability. I'd love you to share this because this is a template
Yeah.
that you can use for anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, people need to understand because the word variability sounds big and mysterious. It just means change. And mindfulness is noticing change rather than assuming everything is the same over and over again, noticing the small differences. Now, I had suggested for people who want to drink less to create a little diary for themselves, and a two by two, where you want to drink, yes or no, you take a drink, yes or no. And, you tune in every couple of hours in the course of the day and just mark it off in a little notebook. And you're going to see that there are times you wanted a drink and you didn't have one. How did that happen if you think you have no control over it? And then there are also times I didn't want to drink, but I took it anyway. And those two cells tell us that we have a lot more control over addictions than most people assume. It's also the case that if you, I make a big deal of this in the book, people's behavior makes sense or else they wouldn't do it. No one wakes up in the morning and says, today I'm going to be obnoxious, stupid, and clumsy. So when they're doing that, what's happening, right? Nobody drinks because they want to hurt their liver. So why are they doing it? And if you approach things from the perspective going forward, why this person is doing what they're doing, you stand a better chance of being able to change circumstances. So if I said to you, here we have Aidan, when he gets upset, he does X and it helps him. Is that irrational? Nobody's going to say it's irrational. Right? Now, so rather than make you feel that you have no control, that you're worthless, that you're less good than everybody else who somehow seems to be able to be on top of these things, you see that your behavior is sensible. It's easier then to move to perhaps another way of dealing with the problem. So to give people more respect for themselves. And so that's part of it. I think as soon as you're doing something more than the person you're close to is doing, you run the risk of them telling you that you're addicted. One person's passion is another person's addiction. So if you and I were married, which would be cute since I'm so much older than you are, but hey, what's the difference? And I was on my phone all the time and I wasn't giving you the attention you wanted, you'd say I'm addicted to my phone. It's interesting, Aidan. I was in South Africa many years ago, and before I was on this show, it was a news show. No idea why I was there, but the newscaster asked me, "Can I ask you something before we start?" I say, "Sure." He said, "What do you think about kids being on their cell phones all the time?" So another kind of addiction. And I said, "You're not gonna like my answer," because clearly he wanted me to say, "Bad, take them away," what have you. And I said, "I believe" I don't have data for this, but I believe that if you present anybody with a caring, nurturing, interesting, exciting in-person conversation, they're going to prefer that to being on the cell phone. And rather than tell the kids to get off their cell phones, I think parents need to up their game and partners who are accusing you of being a workaholic, a phone addict, whatever else.
It's
Uh,
so interesting that because I played professional sport and my wife would go to me, "Oh, well, you were obsessed." And my version of that is that's what it takes to be professional. You have no idea what it's like to be a professional athlete. So therefore you don't know because my kids are now interested in training. And she's like,
mm,
I don't want them to be obsessed like you. And I went, I wasn't obsessed at all. This was
but you
actually
are
what you had to
passionate.
do.
Exactly, exactly.
There's loads of moments when you read this book, and I highly recommend it. You will have loads of these moments. One of the ones I wanted to mention was I've given up drinking altogether now, and I wasn't a heavy drinker anyway, so it was quite easy for me to do. But one of the things that changed my perception of alcohol altogether was have a Garmin, a sleep tracker, and when I watched the sleep tracker, I saw what it did to my deep sleep. Now, the reason I say that is you've done sleep studies, and also you show, well, what you think about your sleep has a
Yeah,
dramatic effect on your
yeah,
sleep.
yeah. This was another one of the mind body unity studies. So we have people in a sleep lab, and we did this at the medicals, Harvard Medical School. So they're hooked up to getting lots and lots of measures. They wake up, and unbeknownst to them, the clock tells them that they got 2 hours more sleep than they actually got, 2 hours fewer, or the sleep they got. And biological and cognitive functioning seem to again follow perceived amount of sleep.
There was a great Henry Ford quote, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And it
Yeah.
emphasized how much attitude determines success or failure, but it's almost more about attitude. In your world, it's the thoughts and beliefs and the mindfulness or mindlessness. The reason I share that, Ellen, is you did a study with two of your then students, Jae Woo Chung and Laura Zhu, to control for things like status and pay. And I think this was so important for people. Most of our audience, they're executives, CEOs, or entrepreneurs. And the idea of the clothes people wear have a dramatic
Yeah,
effect on how they
yeah,
think.
yeah. This was an archival study. Essentially, it occurred to me that if I go into some fancy store, dress shop, and I want to walk out with a mini skirt, they're not going to let me, right? They're going to say it's age inappropriate, right? You get to a certain point, you're a little more modest and what have you. And so thinking about that, it made me aware that clothes are a way to tell the world how old we are and to determine how others treat us. And so if you're wearing a uniform, then you eliminate the age related cue, right? Because if you're 30 in the job or you're 50 in the job, you're wearing the same uniform. And so we compared people who wore uniforms versus those who were not in uniforms. And those in uniforms aged better, were healthier because the world wasn't saying, hey, you're old. It was the same thing with balding, that you're taught when you're young that when a man gets older, he may become bald. Now, that doesn't mean that when a man is bald, he's older. There are many reasons that men may lose their hair, and it happens for people at different times in their lives. But if you start off with the belief, you have a full head of hair, you're a young kid, that if you don't have your hair, that means you're old. Right. And so then we look at people who bald prematurely. And again, there are health problems that you wouldn't otherwise predict. Yeah, the evidence for mind body unity is so ubiquitous that for me it's hard to imagine ever believing that it wasn't one thing. Everybody has had the example, not everybody, but you see somebody regurgitate on the side of the road and all of a sudden you feel sick. Nothing is happening to you. Right. Why should it make, or you're walking down the street and a leaf blows in your face and all of a sudden you're startled. Your blood pressure increases, your pulse, your breath, and so on. Again, just because of a thought that you have. And I tell the story, and people might enjoy the fact that when I started to write The Mindful Body, I started it as a memoir. So there are lots of personal stories there. And I use the personal stories to explain whatever point I'm trying to make as my time with the Hells Angels and so on. I'm not going to tell them about it. They can read it. But when I guess I was 19 and I was married, very young, but times were somewhat different then. And I was different even at different times. And we went to Paris on our honeymoon. We go into this restaurant and I order a mixed grill. And one of the items on the mixed grill was pancreas. I asked my then husband, which of these is a pancreas? And he points to some. All right. Now you have to understand, I'm 19 going on 30. It feels I'm a woman of the world now. I don't know why. Now it seems so silly. But then I believed I had to eat the pancreas. Otherwise, I couldn't show how sophisticated and all grown up I was. Okay, so I eat everything else on the plate. Now the moment of truth. Can I eat it? I start eating it and I literally get sick. Meanwhile, he starts laughing. And I say, "Why are you laughing?" He said, "Because that's chicken. You ate the pancreas a while ago." All right. And so I had experienced very early on that our minds were very crucial in the whole disease process and all aspects of our health.
It's so important, Alan, as a parent. So my children, 11 and 14, I use this all the time on them. I use placebos. Like I'll give them, a sugar pill and go, I kept a packet of these from when I was a pro sports player. These heal your leg really quickly. And I'll give them and then I'll ask, how's your leg? And you go, yeah, it feels a bit better. And I go, I told you. Now I'm going to only keep these for when you're injured in the future. And I truly believe in that. Now, the reason I'm saying that is the problem is, again, we've been socialized and trained to not believe in that. That's woo thinking. Your work, time and time again shows it isn't. And I'm sure you've come into many instances where people have challenged you?
Okay, so I have so much to say, Aidan. The
Oh,
first thing is that if you're doing this with your kids, what you want to do as they get better is teach them that it was a nothing, so you did it for yourself, right? Because we don't want people to become dependent on placebos. Now, the second thing that since things I'm saying and write about are so different from common thought, you would think that people come at me. And they may be coming at me and may just be oblivious to it. But, I gave a talk the other day, and unbeknownst to me, there were many physicians in the audience. And, I wasn't anti-medical, but, what I'm saying is very different from a medical approach. And nobody gave me any flack. And then I spoke to some afterward, and then I realized, like, they know they don't know. And that's all I'm saying is that if you know the person who's telling you what to do can't know for sure, then maybe you'll do some things on your own. And you can't really argue that. Right? So I'm not saying that the medical world has nothing to offer, but we need to be aware that it wasn't that long ago, a few decades ago, where the medical model believed that thoughts, psychology was irrelevant to health. The only way you were going to get sick was the introduction of an antigen pathogen, right? And then eventually that gave way to the biosocial model where people see stress matters. And I'm just trying to move it to where it really belongs, that the psychology is not okay, it matters. It's really the whole ball game. And with that means that we can exercise enormous control.
one of the things on that you were saying was, firstly, you changed my view on this. So I see advertisements for anti-flu or cold and flu medication to help you through cold and flu. But actually, the power of the advertisings can be as influential as the taking the
Yes.
tablet itself now. And you did a reverse study of that where you tested people and go, I wonder, can influencing people to think they have a cold give them a cold?
Yeah. And this study was really mind blowing in some sense because we gave people some tests and we let them know that they were going to get a cold. And without the introduction of a cold virus, and there are 1,000 different kinds, no cold virus introduced, they ended up getting sick. Now, that can be woo woo. I don't know how that happened. There are two possibilities. One is the woo woo, it came out of nowhere. The other is we've all had a cold at some point, and then we get better. But the getting better is probably not 100%. So, there's something that's dormant that we then woke up. But it's interesting to talk about a cold because I have a lot in the book about language and a way that reveals how little control we think we have over our health. And colds, I talk about colds in a different way here. So I went to see a friend of mine who had a very bad case of cancer. And I said, Eva, how are you? She said, I'm in remission. And at that moment, a light went on. I said, wait a second. If I had the exact same tests, presumably they tell me I don't have cancer. Why is it you have it in remission? All right. Because if it's lurking, then you have to be stressed. And, to believe you don't have it, a clean bill of health, you walk around, carry yourself differently. And, I think in a way that's much better for your health. And so then I compared colds with cancer. You get rid of the cold. You don't see yourself as in remission. You see yourself as cured. If you get a cold again, you see it as a new cold. And you're okay with that because you've beaten lots of these before. So it doesn't scare you in the same way. And I think that the medical world does a disservice by this 5-year rule, which I've done a lot of research trying to figure out where this comes from. I can't find a database for it. That if the cancer is not there, you're not cancer free unless 5 years pass and you still don't have it. So for 5 years, you're stressed. And as you know, as a function of reading the book, my belief is that the major killer is stress. A study that I wanted to do during COVID and it's very difficult, so I'll never end up doing it, but is if we took people who were just diagnosed, and we can have them diagnosed with anything. So let's use 5 different kinds of cancer. And, nobody, well, nobody that I know at least, who is given a diagnosis of cancer is happy about it, right? Everybody's gonna be stressed. So give them a little time to deal with it. And so now let's say after 3 weeks after you're given that initial diagnosis, we start measuring how stressed the person is every few weeks or once a month, whatever. I believe the stress level will be a better prognosis for how the person will do than genetics, nutrition, even the treatment. And, that's a big claim, but it's also making clear that since stress is psychological, events don't cause stress. What causes stress are the views we take of events. If we open it up and more mindfully look at whatever it is and recognize that you're stressed when you think something is going to happen, and when it happens, it's going to be dreadful. We can't predict what's going to happen. So if you gave yourself 5 reasons that it's not going to happen, then already going to be less stress. Maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't. Then one step beyond that, since events are neither good nor bad, it depends on how we package them, frame them, that will determine our experience of them. That if you say, let's assume this thing is going to happen, how might it actually be a good thing? So then rather than, "Oh my god, this terrible thing is definitely gonna happen," "This thing may or may not happen, and if it happens, there will be advantages to it." And I think, I have a one-liner in a different book, not in the Mindful Body, that people find helpful, which is when something happens and you're stressed, just ask yourself, "Is it a tragedy or an inconvenience?" And
Yeah.
almost always you don't think, "Oh my god, I missed the bus. Oh my god, I didn't finish the project. Oh my god, I got into a car accident." Then you breathe differently and it passes.
I was thinking about that even that innovation is the kind of core theme of this show. And I was thinking that you need to have the right conditions in order for innovation to happen, including no stress or a feeling of doom within and inside an organization, because you cannot possibly be innovative in your thinking in that way. But also that for a cold or a flu to take place, you need to be in certain conditions. Your temperature needs to be at a certain point. That's why people get them more in winter, etc. But also, to your point, your stress levels need to be at a certain level, and then you create these perfect conditions as well. Now, I wanted to use that as a segue to the first part of the book and go back there, if that's okay, where you talk
Sure.
about the foundational issues about rules, risk, prediction, decision making, and social comparing, which are all so relevant with inside people working inside organizations. And this book, I don't want people to get the term mindfulness wrong here. It's not about how to meditate or anything like that. It's so much about how we live. And if we live mindfully and pay attention. And you tell us here, Ellen, if we can adopt a new view of these concepts, we are well on our way to being more mindful, confident, and empowered. When we make these shifts in our thinking, our relationships with others and ourselves improve, and our stress lessens, all in the service of improving our health. So I thought we'd start with rules.
Yeah, I mean, I don't wanna seem to be a rebel, but and also I'm too old to be put in that category. But on the other hand, maybe it's appropriate because I've always said, "Who says so?" In fact, in one early title of this book was "Who Says So?" Because everything we're told to do was just a decision. Now, if it was a decision, that means there was uncertainty. That means there's another way, or maybe 5 other ways that we could do whatever it is. And so what happens is you have people who make this decision in uncertainty that meets their needs, and then it's sort of given to the rest of us in perpetuity. Rather than say, well, wait a second, maybe this needs to be questioned. Maybe it's not the right way of doing things at this point. Now, one of the things when I'm lecturing in person, I often look in the audience and say, is there a very tall person there? Usually male. And almost always there is. He's 6'5". I invite him to the stage. We look very silly. I'm 5'3", right? Okay. I asked him to put his hand up. His hand is 3 and 4 inches larger than mine. And then I just raised the question, should we do anything the same way? It seems crazy, right? Now, the rules are going to be written for one or the other of us. They're not going to work for both of us. And typically, they're written by him for him. The more different you are from the person who created the rule, the more important it is for you to deviate from the rule. And rules should be used as here's one way. I can sort of do it this way. Not that this is the way. If I'm holding a tennis racket the same way he is holding a tennis racket with his much larger hand, something is not going to be good for me. All right. It's perhaps a little off color in some way, but you take a toilet seat. Now, toilet seats are all the same size. And if he is using that toilet seat, and I, not at the same moment, clearly using that, one of us are not getting our biological needs met. And so to recognize that when something doesn't fit, there's nothing wrong with you. It just means that you're different from the person who created whatever it is. An example I use in the book, I'm a tennis player, medium, intermediate. Okay. But I have this killer, used to have this killer serve. I kill it, doesn't go in. Now, because I'm playing doubles, I don't want to upset everybody on the court. So rather than risk double faulting, I have a little wuss second serve that always goes there. If I ruled the world, I would have made tennis 3 serves. The first one, I kill it, doesn't go in. The second one, I kill it again because I've learned from the first one. So I'm learning. And then I still have my follow up was serve. Now, nobody should think, I can't imagine you would find anybody who believes that the rules of tennis were handed down from the heavens. Right? It's just people deciding this. I mean, the funniest one I think is golf. I can't imagine the kind of person, I should maybe read about who developed the game of golf, but who decides hitting a ball 300 yards is equivalent to hitting it a half of an inch. Both can, But so people decide based on what's good for them. If it works for you, fine. If it doesn't, change it. And when we recognize that virtually everything that was given to us was just a decision made by others, we recognize that everything is mutable, that we have control over everything. And it's sad to me that so few people take advantage of this.
It's so true for innovation that we oftentimes in organizations, the older the organization, the more of these rules and even the origin of those rules is no longer known. And people follow those rules without questioning
Yeah.
it. And the world keeps changing. Like you said, like the world's changed, so the rules have to change, but they don't.
Right. Well, as far as innovation goes, we've done some research on this. I think it's in another book. Essentially, you do something and it doesn't work. Let's use 3M. Okay. So you know that 3M was trying to create a glue and the glue failed to adhere. And so if you ask yourself, you've just put in all this money to create this product that's a failure. What can you do with it? Now, if you ask yourself, what can you do with a failed glue? It's not going to generate any thoughts, right? Because you've already decided it's glue and failure, has its own problems. But if you bring it down to the level of property and you said to yourself, what could I do with this substance that adheres for a short amount of time? Many ideas would come to mind. And for them, it was the Post it note, which I think made them far more money and continues to do so than yet one more glue out there.
And again, this comes down to framing, the language you
Yeah,
use. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So when we talk about language for a minute, that, I have a part of the book, if you remember, where I call it better than better, where people have a problem and psychologists or bosses, coaches and business, what have you, help you go from bad to okay. I said, wait a sec. There's a whole other way of being. And so an example that reveals this to me is a language that we use. So here is a very simple one. You have somebody who's giving up, whether it's an industry or what, or school, what have you. and you get them to try. Okay, well, trying to do something is certainly better than not trying, just assuming you can't do it. But trying has built into it an expectation for failure. You don't try to eat an ice cream cone, you just eat the ice cream. So we have some little studies where we have one group try to do it, another group just told to do it. And the doing group. No, after I reported this the first time, somebody said, "Oh, Yoda said that." It's okay. So I'm in good company. Langer and Yoda. But words like hope sounds good, right? Everybody thinks you should have hope. Hope is better than being hopeless. But when I go down in the morning to the kitchen to get coffee, I don't hope there's coffee there. I just presume there'll be coffee there. So again, hoping has built in this expectation for failure. Why does it matter? Because if you're looking for failure, you're going to see certain things as failure that just as easily could have been seen as successes or something that's on its way to being a success.
I love those studies because, again, as a parent as well, when you're aware, when you're mindful of catching yourself in the act of metacognition of going, I said to my son, try your best instead of do your best. Those words have a dramatic effect. One of the studies you talked about was the people jumping in line in the Xerox.
That was one of the first studies on mindlessness. We approached people who, this is when we had Xerox machines. People listening to you probably don't even know what those are now. But anyway, so these were machines they used to copy things. You didn't have Bluetooth or any of this other technology. And we simply asked, "Excuse me, can I get ahead of you because I want to make copies?" Now, what else were you going to do with a Xerox machine except make copies? So it was empty information. But when you gave a reason, people were more likely to comply, even if the reason made no sense.
I had that happen, Ellen. I'm sure you have as well in an airport, and people are like, "Oh, excuse me, I have to get a plane." You're like, "Hang on, well, what the hell are
Well,
the rest
that's
of us? Of course, we're getting a plane." It's always an awkward moment as well. I thought we'd share one more thing, if that's okay, because we're going to do a part two, and we're going to go into loads of stuff: social comparing, risk, perceived time, perceived fatigue, blood sugar tests. There's so much in the book, and I highly recommend it, and I really do recommend it. And be mindful when you're reading the book as well. But the last thing I thought we'd land today's ship on was the idea of risk and the illusion of control, because that was a really that was a it's a profound idea where you realize that do your best, take the risk, because even when you take the risk and you're kind of going, oh, I don't know, should I go left or go right? And you're kind of going, oh, should I take this job or should I take this job? You don't know. You can't possibly
Yeah.
know and go that way. So you
This
can't
is,
then have regrets.
this is a big one that maybe we should save for part
Let's
two.
save it. Let's
So,
save it. Yeah, because let's tee it up because it's so important. Because there's actually, you're right. There's a lot in it. There's decision making. There's risks. There's also
vision of predictability.
illusion of predictability, a huge one as well. I'm so grateful for having you on the show. I absolutely love the book. And I just want to say, we probably touched maybe 10% of it, the amount of studies, because also Ellen brings in loads of previous books, parts of those studies as well before. And I'd read many of your studies, and so much of what you have done is in our lexicon. We hear these things somewhere in the ether, and they probably have been your studies done. For example, that whole idea, don't ever use the word try, use the word do. I heard that many times and I look for the source, Alan Langer. So, and Yoda, Yoda from Star Wars as well. Ellen, for people who want to find you and find out more about your work and your books, where's the best place?
I think it's ellenlanger.me. I don't even know what's on the website. Just put in my name and all sorts of things will come up. It depends on if people want to see my books, then Google Ellen Langer, comma books, which you also have on my website. I think that a nice place to end today is for people to understand that what I'm saying is we have far more control over our health and well being than we realize. And the subtitle of the American version of the book is Thinking Our Way to Chronic Health. That or, the English version, Thinking Our Way to Lasting Health. Either way, the idea is that the health, the life we want, the satisfaction, peace of mind is only a thought away.
Absolutely beautiful. And there's so many little nuggets like that throughout the book as well. I highly recommend it. I'll link to it, link to both the .com and .co.uk, and indeed Ellen's book. Author of The Mindful Body, Ellen Langer. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.